So talking about Nigeria, here we know that there are three major groups, but there are also over 200 minor ethnic groups, and yeah, sometimes occasionally the conflict happens between these groups, larger groups, but and also occasionally it can be also as happened in the case of Biafra war between the two various regions, but other times you might have it between the major groups and smaller groups, or and also between those minor groups themselves. So yeah, the bottom line is conflicts can be, in a larger sense, ethnic, crossing the one of these three major groups here, but they might be also communal. I mean, within one of these regions, you have tribe against tribe. The point simply being that it's a very complex situation in Nigeria that cannot simply be reduced to being about religion. Because sometimes, as an outsider, all we see here is, well, there might be Boko Haram who are Islamic, or there is the Islamic North that wants to practice Sharia law, and other groups that don't want to do this. It's more complex than that. And just to show you, to give you just a small taste of mm, how complex that might be, this is one of the example of many different maps. This is not even the smallest level you can go to, but it kind of shows us how many different ethnics or tribal identities one might find in Nigeria. And again, it gets even smaller than that. So, in closing, what I want to talk about a little bit is that's a situation that they have got. But I want to describe a little bit and discuss a little bit that, where this comes from and where this might be going. The ethnic conflict, which unfortunately is so rapid in Nigeria. So, interesting enough, obviously, they are outside of a larger war. What tends to happen that most violent and destructive conflicts are actually those that are more on the communal lines between the two communities, rather than saying, along the three lines, larger military groups going at it one another. No, 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 no. It's not that. It's this neighboring community against neighboring community a lot of the times. The point is that oftentimes, though, it's still kind of expressed very primordially, in the sense it's not about class differences or different labor groups or gender, but it might be expressed as something that is religious, right, in nature. But r- but really is going on. What really is going on is this idea of elites. The leaders in Nigeria are still very heavily divided along different lines. Those that are urban, those that are rural, maybe based on religious differences, but also ethnic differences. Simply language and things that are older. Even then, some of the religious differences. Now, the point is that many societies might have these differences, but they were really accentuated and built upon by the British. When they came to Nigeria, they realized, well, we could play the different groups one against the other, and that will prevent them from rising up against us and ever throwing off our colonial leadership. So the British were there. Remember, they practiced indirect rule. They let the individual leaders still mostly run things in a different communities, but then in handing out the goodies, saying, "Well, where is the which communities will be we will build our roads, our railroads through, where will be build ports and things like that." they would usually play group one against the other, and that was, served to reinforce the differences in a sense of competition between the group. One of the problem is that a lot of elites, especially at the local level, um, really lack authority. They don't have much money. They don't have that much power. The only thing they have got is authority. They are the official leader, so they are always scrambling for resources and maintaining the main resource that the central government can provide for them is the ability to regulate, the ability to hand out permits for the business or to build a bank in certain place or things like that. That kind of power is what the central government can still dole out or pass out, but they tend to do it along ethnic lines, right? And as I say, this is against this much resources and can rule over this kind of issues. These other ethnic groups can rule over these things, but the groups are constantly in competition, wanting to able to regulate over a little bit more, have more resources. And when those things get supported, when there is a new division, the central government said, well, maybe we will let group A have a little bit more power or regulate certain issues or be in control of certain things. And that's where conflict really arises. When when you see some conflicts between non-elites, not between the actual leaders, it's often less instrumental, right? And probably honestly primordial. So you really might have it being about a lack of ritual observance, going through a graveyard, not honoring somebody's descendants. Those kind of things can trigger violence between groups. But mostly, what seems to be going on is that the leaders kind of mobilize their followers, mobilize the people in their villages to go after people in other villages, maybe based on what they claim are religious differences or religious problem, but it is really more of a scramble for resources. Now, the final question has to do with, well, Nigeria has now politically seen a return to democracy. What is in place for all, which is in place for almost 20 years. Democracy has been in place for 20 years since Obasanjo has become president back in 1999. What has this return to democracy done in terms of level of ethnic conflict in Nigeria? Now, the sad truth is that most observers agree that it has led to even greater scramble for resources. Again, because now these are elected officials rather than military junta that is in place, you who cannot be replaced. Here, individual groups can go to higher up leaders and say, listen, you may not get voted in again next time. If you want to get voted in, you have to give us more resources. So you see a lot of jockeying for position, a greater scramble for resources, which sometimes plays out into violence. When you have the military power, the irony was the individual groups couldn't expect that many favors, because if you know at the lower level can't really tell the military what to do. You can't tell an authoritarian government what to do. Whereas you can seek uh, to get favors from a democratic government to a larger extent. The flip side of this, of course, is that is with democracy as is meant to Nigeria is much more open to having non-government organizations which have stepped in, trying to facilitate more communication and education. And oftentimes you see the ones that are more successful here being the international NGOs, because again they are not seen as being biased towards one group or the other. So I mean, well, that's been one of the positive sides of um, trying to relieve the ethnic tension, um, and focus on the commonalities that people um, have, like poverty or lack of jobs. um, Remember, this is what Dahl was um, worried about, right? These subcultural differences being a huge problem, and Nigeria has yet to really overcome all of this.